Baghdad, 40 years ago. The streets are clean. Bread costs less than tea. Fuel is practically free. Children in school uniforms recite party slogans. Women graduate from medical school. Students receive scholarships to study in Moscow, London, Rome. At the same time, someone disappears after telling a joke about the president. Someone else vanishes after meeting a cousin from Iran. This country had everything, and it lost everything. This is not a story about a tyrant, nor about victims. This is a story about people who lived between silence and fear, between luxury and torture, between a mathematics lesson and an execution in a stadium. What does life look like when the state gives you an apartment, an education, and a job, but can also rip out your fingernails for a single sentence? This was Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Today, you step inside. No shortcuts, no commentary, no mercy. Ready? Let's begin. Early morning, March of 1988. A strange, sweet scent drifts over the Kurdish town of Halabja. Residents emerge from their homes, visibly puzzled. It smells like freshly picked apples, or perhaps apricots. Some say it's like freshly cut grass. No one yet knows this is the smell of death. Iraqi aircraft have just dropped bombs filled with chemical agents, sarin, taboon, mustard gas, and VX. Within hours, the streets become a cemetery. Mothers freeze mid-motion, clutching their children. Entire families collapse over shared meals. Bodies of humans and animals lie side by side. No one is spared. Bahar Mohammed Mahmoud survived that day. She recalls, "I remember people running through the streets like they'd gone mad. Some were laughing, others screaming. I watched one family die right in front of me. They were hugging each other, mother, father, and son, in the middle of the street. They were bleeding from their eyes, and it looked like their eyes were coming out of their heads. They looked like demons. I'll never forget it." Between 3,000 and 5,000 people die within hours. 3/4 of the victims are women and children. Hosmand Morad Mohammed is only 6 years old during the attack. He loses his parents, grandmother, and 4 uncles. Today he says, "Everyone in Halabja has a terrible story about the smell of apples, the bodies we passed as we fled the city, people and animals. No one was spared." Pause here for a moment, because this story doesn't begin in Halabja, and it doesn't end there. This is merely one chapter in the tale of a country that managed to build some of the finest schools in the Arab world, eliminate illiteracy, grant women rights unprecedented in the region, and simultaneously, with bureaucratic precision, carry out genocide against its own citizens. How is this possible? How could one state be both a symbol of progress and a living hell? To understand, we need to step back 2 decades, to the times that older Iraqis still call the Golden Age. But I warn you, this journey won't be easy. Baghdad in the 1970s. Broad boulevards lined with palm trees, elegant cafes along Abu Nuwas Street, where the air carries the aroma of freshly grilled carp, the famous masgouf. Women in Western dresses stroll alongside men in tailored suits. Hollywood films play in the cinemas, nearly 300 of them across the country. Bookstores stock literature from around the world. This isn't Paris. This is the capital of Iraq. And it's entering an era unlike anything it has ever seen. On the 1st of June, 1972, a young vice president named Saddam Hussein stands before the cameras and announces a decision that changes everything. Iraq takes full control of the Iraq Petroleum Company. It's the nationalization of oil. A year later, the global oil crisis erupts. Crude prices skyrocket, and money begins flooding into Iraq like a tidal wave. The numbers are staggering. Gross domestic product grows more than 12-fold in a single decade. The Iraqi dinar becomes one of the strongest currencies in the world. 1 dinar worth more than $3 American. By the end of the decade, foreign reserves exceed $35 billion. And what does the Ba'ath Party government do with all this money? It invests in people. A professor from Mosul, who attended school during those years, remembers, "We had a state-run nutrition system. Students received stationery, notebooks, pens, and books. My classmates lived on the same street. School helped us feel like part of a unified community." Another Baghdad resident adds, Teachers had respect, they had authority. We students feared them more than our own fathers. That authority pushed us to be open to learning. Education becomes a national priority. The government passes a law for the total elimination of illiteracy. Every citizen between the ages of 15 and 45 must attend reading and writing courses. The state opens thousands of centers across the country, from Baghdad to the most remote villages. Illiteracy drops from nearly 70% to just 20%. UNESCO awards Iraq a prize for education. Primary school enrollment reaches nearly 100%. Healthcare undergoes an equally spectacular transformation. More than 170 modern hospitals are built, along with 1,200 primary care centers. Treatment is completely free. Infant mortality drops by more than half. 90% of urban residents have access to clean water. A US congressional report later summarizes, in the 1980s, Iraq had one of the most advanced economies in the Arab world, a relatively large middle class, per capita income comparable to Venezuela or Korea, and one of the best education systems in the region. And women? Here, Iraq leaps ahead of the entire region by a full generation. The constitution guarantees equal rights for both sexes. Women can vote, study, work in any position. They receive 6 months of fully paid maternity leave with the option to extend. They comprise nearly 40% of teachers, 1/3 of doctors, 1/4 of laboratory technicians. Half of the country's physicians are women. Iraq produces the first female judge in the Arab world, the first female ambassador, and the first female minister. One Iraqi woman recalls those times. "I have 4 children. We must speak the truth. Not everything was bad under Saddam's rule. We received maternity leave with full salaries." Iraqi women living in the West tell researchers something surprising: that it was far easier to work and have children in the Iraq of the 1970s and 80s than to cope with conditions in Western societies. The literacy rate among Iraqi women reaches 87%. Zainab, a woman from Baghdad who later emigrated to America, describes those times. "We were all friends. We celebrated together. When we had a ceremony commemorating Imam Hussein, even Jews and Christians joined us. We never thought about race or religion. Schools were open to everyone. We had Jewish, Christian, Sunni, and Kurdish classmates. There were no bad feelings toward anyone." Daily life in Baghdad is safe, prosperous, and modern. Gasoline costs pennies. Iraq has the lowest fuel prices in the world, about 1 cent per litre. Shops overflow with imported goods from around the globe. The Halabja resort becomes a symbol of the era. Egyptian film stars, Iraqi singers, everyone comes here. A local sheikh remembers, "I saw men and women swimming together in bathing suits and dancing." Ahmed Sadawi, an Iraqi writer, recalls, "Many Iraqis of different faiths and ethnic groups view the 1970s as Iraq's golden age. I remember cinemas, beautiful parks, popular songs, weddings, and a prosperous economy. A black and white photo album where I'm wearing expensive clothes with flowering bushes from Zara Gardens in the background. I remember falling asleep in cinemas on Sardoon Street when my uncle took me there." More than half of urban residents belong to the middle class. Thousands of young Iraqis leave on government scholarships to the United States and Europe, returning as doctors, engineers, scientists. A former Baghdad policeman puts it simply, "I could sleep with my garden door open. I could sleep peacefully, as long as I had no problems with the bath party. I was safe." And that last sentence is the key. As long as I had no problems with the bath party. Because all this prosperity, this modernization, this progress, it all came with a price. A price most people preferred not to discuss. To get a scholarship, you had to be in the party. To get promoted, you had to be in the party. To get an apartment, you had to be in the party. And to be in the party, you had to stay silent. Before I tell you about the price of silence, you need to meet the man who created all of this. A man whose path to power began in a mud hut, with beatings from an asphalt-covered stick. On the 28th of April, 1937, in a mud hut in the village of Halabja near Tikrit, a boy is born. His father is either dead or has abandoned the family. Accounts vary. One thing is certain, Saddam never knows him. His mother, Suba Tulfa, sinks into depression. An older brother also dies. According to a CIA psychological profile, Suba attempts to terminate the pregnancy and to take her own life. When the boy is born, his mother wants nothing to do with him. For the first years of his life, the boy depends on the mercy of distant relatives. Then his mother remarries to Ibrahim al-Hassan. And here, the nightmare begins. Biographers describe how Ibrahim pushes the local concept of toughening discipline to its extremes. As punishment, he beats his stepson with an asphalt-covered stick. Ibrahim regularly beats the boy, sometimes just to wake him up. The stepfather doesn't merely abuse the child. He forbids him from attending school, forces him to herd sheep, forces him to steal. Saddam is raised in the grim conviction that the world is an inherently hostile place, life a constant struggle for survival, and survival achievable only through total self-reliance, chronic distrust, and the necessity of destroying others before they destroy you. At the age of 10, the boy escapes. Jealous that his cousin can attend school, he sets off on foot to Baghdad, to the home of his uncle, Khairallah Talfa. And here, the story takes darker tones. Khairallah is a former Iraqi army officer, a participant in a failed coup that supported Nazi Germany. He spent several years in prison for it. The uncle becomes the young nephew's ideological mentor. He instills in him contempt for foreigners and hatred of enemies. Later, when Saddam rises to power, the government will publish and distribute in schools a pamphlet by Khairallah entitled "Three Things God Should Not Have Created: Persians, Jews, and Flies." It describes Persians as animals in human form, and Jews as a mixture of filth. The future dictator keeps a plaque bearing this pamphlet's title on his desk for the rest of his life. In his uncle's home, the boy finally begins attending school, and here, a defining trait emerges: ambition coupled with ruthlessness. According to classmates' recollections, he carries a metal rod with him and uses it against anyone who stands in his way. His engagement to his cousin Sajida is arranged when he is 5, she 7. They marry later, but first, a baptism by fire. The 7th of October, 1959, Al-Rashid Street in Baghdad, 6:30 in the evening. 22-year-old Saddam is part of a 6-man Ba'ath Party assault team. Their target, the assassination of Prime Minister Abdul Karim Qasim, who overthrew the monarchy the previous year. What happens? According to accounts, the young assassin loses his nerve and opens fire too early, creating chaos. The Prime Minister's driver dies. Qasim himself is wounded but survives. One of the assassins is killed, probably by bullets from his own comrades. And Saddam himself? He takes a bullet to the leg. According to sources, apparently from bullets fired by his own colleagues. He later tells the story of extracting the bullet from the wound himself. The official biography presents an epic escape. A commandeered car, swimming across the Tigris, a trek through the desert to Syria, then on to Egypt. A few years later, the Baathists finally overthrow and eliminate Qasim. Saddam returns. He is imprisoned, escapes, conspires. On the 17th of July 1968, he participates in a bloodless coup, personally escorting the Prime Minister at gunpoint to a plane. Officially, Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr becomes president. Saddam is merely vice president. But he controls the security apparatus. He builds a network of secret agents. He decides who lives and who dies. For 11 years he remains in the shadows, patiently waiting. Until the summer of 1979 arrives. On the 16th of July 1979, the ailing president Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr is forced to resign. Officially, he steps down for health reasons, but unofficially, Saddam has decided the time has come to assume full power. Simply taking the presidential seat isn't enough for him, though. He must show everyone that from this moment forward, only one man matters in this state. 6 days later, he convenes an extraordinary session of the Ba'ath Party leadership. Around 400 officials gather in the Al-Quld conference hall in Baghdad, and the entire event is filmed on his personal orders. Saddam sits calmly behind a table, slowly smoking a cigar. His face shows absolutely no emotion as the doors to the hall are sealed shut. A man is led to the podium, Muhi Abdul Hussein Mashhadi, former secretary of the Revolutionary Command Council. His appearance makes clear he has passed through the brutal hands of interrogators and been completely broken. He begins speaking in a trembling voice about an alleged conspiracy, treason, and secret collaboration with Syria against Iraq. And then, to the horror of those assembled, he begins naming people sitting in the very same room. One by one, the named men are escorted out by security officers. Some scream desperate slogans of loyalty, begging for mercy. Others go in complete silence. The rest in the hall are paralyzed with fear, not knowing if their own name will be called next. In a surge of terror, they begin chanting, "Long live Saddam Hussein! Long live the party!" 68 people are arrested that day. That same day, 22 of them face the firing squad. And here, Saddam reveals his genius for cruelty. The firing squads are composed of the remaining party leadership, colleagues of the condemned, men who just a week earlier shared meals and planned the future with them. Now they must shoot them. It is a masterstroke. From this moment on, everyone has blood on their hands and shares the guilt. No one can ever claim innocence. Among those executed are the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Education, and the Chairman of the Trade Union Federation. Mashhadi himself, who read out the list of traitors, is executed a few weeks later. The recording of that session is distributed among party members throughout the country as a bloody warning. The recording shows Saddam sitting calmly with his cigar and the men around him, some weeping, others looking utterly stunned. You see the faces of men who have just realized they have become slaves to a single will. This massacre of comrades ends the era of collegial rule. From this moment, Saddam's word becomes the supreme law. The construction of a personality cult on an unprecedented scale begins. Before I tell you about that, however, you need to understand the machine that allowed one man to control 25 million people. Imagine living in Baghdad in the 1980s. You wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, and go to work. On the surface, everything seems normal. Yet something unsettling hangs in the air. You see it in the uncertain glances of neighbors and feel it in the sudden silence that falls when conversation drifts toward political topics. To understand this life, you need to know the machine that controls every aspect of Iraqi existence. At the very top sits the president, and beneath him stretches a labyrinth of security services that spy on each other and compete for influence, fearing one another almost as much as ordinary citizens fear them. The first is the General Security Service, operating since 1921. It has branches in every province and agents in every workplace, school, and mosque. Its officers are the eyes and ears of the regime. They're the ones listening to conversations in cafes and knocking on doors at 3 in the morning. Next is the Mukhabarat, the official Iraqi intelligence service. It monitors loyalty within the party itself, infiltrates all organizations, and carries out ruthless assassinations of dissidents abroad. The third is the Special Security Service, the most elite and terrifying, commanded by Saddam's son Hussein. Its agents spy on other spies and oversee weapons programs. Even intelligence officers tremble before this agency's operatives. There's also military intelligence watching the army and the Republican Guard, an elite force of 15,000 trusted men. All these formations have deliberately overlapping responsibilities, designed to compete and inform on each other. This isn't a flaw, it's the foundation of the system. For ordinary citizens, it means one thing. Wherever they are, they're being watched. Documents from Ba'ath Party archives paint a disturbing picture. People lived in a world where neighbors informed on each other for money, and interrogators received generous bonuses for extracting confessions. Police earned pennies for catching criminals, but could count on fortunes for imprisoning people for their thoughts and words. Political culture became saturated with fear, as described in the book Republic of Fear. No one dared mock the authorities anymore. The system of encouraging children to inform was particularly insidious. In schools, they were taught that loyalty to the party and the leader was more important than family bonds. Children were supposed to report to teachers anything suspicious they heard at the dinner table. One careless comment from a child could lead to the arrest of an entire family. Parents began fearing their own children and stopped speaking the truth in their presence. The domestic sanctuary became a place of silence, and the saying that walls have ears became brutal reality. It wasn't the walls that had ears, it was the neighbor, the co-worker, or the shopkeeper. What happens to those who get reported? That's coming next, but I warn you, it won't be easy reading. In the Iraq of those years, a separate, dark map of places exists that are mentioned only in whispers. Abu Ghraib, a name that later becomes known worldwide, but long before international scandals, it was a synonym for hell for millions of Iraqis. In this enormous prison complex outside Baghdad, according to testimonies, between 1993 and 1998, approximately 3,000 prisoners were shot. Executions took place in a location known as the execution garden. The regime's practices were sometimes even more cynical. When money ran short, wealthy prisoners were released for bribes, but since they had officially been declared dead, replacements had to be found. According to intelligence documents, at least 50 psychiatric hospital patients were taken and executed to replace the freed wealthy prisoners. No one advocated for the mentally ill. Other locations on this map of horror include Al-Radwaniyah, where bodies were buried by bulldozers, and Nugra as-Salman, a prison in the middle of the desert where thousands of Kurdish families were held in horrific conditions without water. The torture methods were terrifyingly inventive. Beatings with cables, electric shocks, cigarette burns, breaking limbs, ripping out fingernails. There was also the barrel of hell, rotating the victim over fire, and freezing by pouring water over them in the cold. People were locked in metal boxes the size of coffins, opened briefly only once a day. Saad Mohammed, who spent 4 years in prison, tells of having to crawl through a meter-high door into a room crammed with 50 men. They slept in shifts on the floor, and the only reason for leaving the cell was another torture session. He ended up there because a party member overheard him cursing Saddam on the street. Ahmed Hassan, arrested at 15, testified that he saw a meat grinder in prison from which blood and human hair emerged. Another witness recalled the dictator's brother, Barzan, calmly eating grapes during torture sessions. Desertion was punished by ear amputation. One survivor remembers how the surgeon threw him into a cell full of men with bloody stumps after the procedure. Many died from infection. The most terrifying, however, were the sudden disappearances. A person taken by the services simply vanished. No trial, no trace. Families never learned the fate of their loved ones. Tens of thousands of people are estimated to have evaporated this way, including about 20,000 Faili Kurds, whose remains were found only after the regime's fall. A former prisoner from Basra confessed years later, "I'm still afraid. Those who did this to me simply took off their uniforms and went home. They're still there." Physical torture was just one element of a broader system, the psychological torture of an entire nation based on the fear of words. In September of 2000, Iraqi state television broadcasts unusual footage. A man sits before the camera. His mouth is open. You see a stump where his tongue used to be. This is the execution of a decree Saddam signed. The punishment for defaming the president or his family, amputation of the tongue. But this isn't the only penalty for words. Greg Kehoe, an American investigator examining regime crimes, recounts, "People were shot for telling a joke. In the Ba'ath Party archives, death sentences were found with transcripts of jokes told by the condemned attached. Literally. Someone meticulously recorded the joke. Someone else signed the death warrant." One story tells of a teacher who joked among friends that Saddam loved his photographs so much that he probably worried whether people looked at them even in bathrooms. The next day, he vanished. People stopped speaking. First about politics, then about anything that might be interpreted as politics. Eventually, they stopped speaking altogether. Parents whisper in the bedroom, but even then they're careful. What if the child wakes up? What if they remember? What if they repeat it at school? Lisa Blades, a political scientist at Stanford, analyzed more than 2,000 rumors collected by the Ba'ath Party. Yes, the party collected rumors. What were people saying? that Uday, Saddam's son, demanded meat from restaurants to feed his tiger, that the party released diseased rats in the Shia district. Rumors were a form of resistance, the only safe one, because a rumor can be denied. Blades notes, rumors played a special role in authoritarian regimes. Because they're ephemeral and often leave no trace, they could be safely shared with trusted confidants. Trusted. That's the key word. Who is trusted in a country where anyone could be an informant? Fear of words is only part of the control system. There's something else, an image that cannot be escaped, a face at every turn. You wake up in the morning in 1980s Baghdad. You leave your house. On the street corner, a billboard with a smiling Saddam in uniform. You go to work. A portrait of the president hangs above the boss's desk. You enter a cafe, another portrait. Schools, in every classroom. Hospitals, in every examination room. Bus stops, restaurants, grocery stores. Thousands of portraits, posters, statues, and murals across the country. Saddam was depicted in various incarnations. In traditional Bedouin dress, in peasant clothing, in Kurdish costume, despite murdering Kurds, in a Western suit, in military uniform, as Saladin, as Nebuchadnezzar. Failing to display a portrait could be perceived as political disloyalty. The secret police monitored this. Then there are the watches. Swiss watches with Saddam's photographic portrait on the dial. Brands like Oris, Eternomatic, Universal Genève. They become an iconic symbol of the regime. British photographer Martin Parr documented 35 different models. Every denomination of the Iraqi dinar features the president's face. Propaganda rugs in dollar bill style, bearing his image, are sold today as collectibles. The famous statue in Firdos Square, 12 meters tall, erected for Saddam's 65th birthday. The same one that would be toppled by Americans. Between 80 and 100 palaces built during 24 years of rule. Half were constructed after the Kuwait War, during sanctions while children starved. Estimated cost, $2 billion. More than the World Food Programme spent in 1 year, feeding 77 million people worldwide. Al Faw Palace, 62 rooms, 29 bathrooms. An artificial lake stocked with Saddam Bass. As-Salam Palace, 200 rooms, 6 floors, a dome crowned with a life-sized statue of the president. Gold faucets, gold toilet flushes. The Victory Arch in Baghdad, 2 gigantic hands holding swords. The swords are 43 meters long and weigh 24 tons each. The hands, 15 meters tall, 20 tons. The material? Swords made of stainless steel, allegedly forged from melted rifles of fallen Iraqi soldiers. Bronze hands cast from plaster molds of Saddam's own forearms. Sculptor Mohammed Ghani Hikmat took impressions of the president's thumb, adding it to the mold. At the base, 5,000 Iranian helmets, allegedly captured on the battlefield. At the opening ceremony, Saddam rode under the arches on a white horse, echoing the Shia martyr Imam Hussein. And the president's birthday? The 28th of April was made a national holiday. Mass celebrations, days of television coverage. In schools, children could forego uniforms for 1 day. A morning ceremony with poems praising Baba Saddam. Every class had to bake a birthday cake for the president. At exactly 9 o'clock in the evening, the main televised event began. Saddam appeared in a dazzling white suit. Hundreds of children, carefully selected after hours of vetting, greeted him with cheers and tears. The central birthday cake, 15 to 20 tiers. Different themes each year. Once, a green cake shaped like a tree. Another time, Saddam arrived in a Cinderella-style carriage. The cruelty of these spectacles became especially evident during the sanction years. Sugar, flour, eggs, chocolate, ingredients unavailable to ordinary Iraqis, were wasted on a show for the dictator. And then there's the Quran, commissioned for Saddam's 60th birthday as gratitude to God for help in surviving many conspiracies and dangers, written in the president's blood. Calligrapher Abbas Shakir Judi al-Baghdadi worked for 2 years, declared volume of blood between 24 and 27 liters. Experts are skeptical. The US blood donation limit is 5 to 6 pints per year. Such a volume would take over 9 years to collect at a safe pace. 605 pages, 6,000 verses, approximately 336,000 words. Religious controversy was immediate. Religious authorities in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia condemned the work. Under Sharia law, human blood is ritually impure. Creating a Quran from blood is forbidden. Destroying a Quran is also forbidden, creating an unsolvable dilemma. Today, the blood Quran is stored in the Mother of All Battles Mosque in Baghdad, locked in a basement behind 3 vaulted doors, with keys distributed among a sheikh, a police commissioner, and a secret third party. This is personality cult taken to its ultimate limits. Behind the facade of divinity, however, lay the true nature of the regime, and no one embodied it better than Saddam's sons. To understand the full dimension of the nightmare, you need to meet Saddam's sons, especially one of them, Uday Hussein, the firstborn, the heir, and, according to many witnesses, the most sadistic figure in the Iraqi regime. After Saddam's fall, a man identifying himself as Abu Ahmad appears before British television Sky News. He claims to have been Uday's personal executioner. He recounts an event from 1999. 2 19-year-old students from the Academy of Fine Arts were arrested. Their crime? Competing with Uday for the attention of young women. I watched as the first student's head literally tore from his body at the first bite. And then I had to stand and watch as the animals devoured both young men. When they finished, only bones and pieces of unwanted meat remained. Uday had a private zoo. When American forces took over his palace, they found 19 lions. Some were confirmed as man-eaters. Uday ran the Iraqi Olympic Committee for nearly 20 years. When Americans searched the Football Association headquarters, they found an Iron Maiden, a medieval torture device. According to Time magazine, it was clearly worn from use. Ahmed Radi, Iraq's most famous striker, was imprisoned twice. He was sentenced to 6 lashes for 6 mistakes on the field. Shara Haidar, beaten for 4 days in Al-Radwaniyah prison, tortured with sleep deprivation. Laith Hussein, the top scorer in Iraqi football history, was imprisoned 6 times. He was denied a transfer to Barcelona. Habib Jafar, the best player of the Gulf Cup, Uday's favorite target, subjected to isolation torture in the Red Room. Hashim Khamis, Abdul Jabbar Hashim, Katan Chatir, lashed for 3 days after losing to Japan 4-1. Yasser Abdul Latif, the captain, his head shaved, stripped naked, whipped with electrical cables in 2-hour sessions. The methods? Beating the soles of feet, kicking concrete balls after failing to qualify for the World Cup, dragging through gravel, submersion in sewage, electric shocks, isolation in red rooms, chambers lit only with red light. And these are just the footballers, known figures. What happened to the unknown? Adib Al-Ani served as Uday's secretary for 12 years. Uday wanted a different woman every night and ordered his bodyguards to kidnap those who caught his attention, often very young girls, but also women from wealthy families. A wedding at the exclusive hunting club. Uday notices the bride. He leaves. She disappears. When guards block the doors, the groom draws a pistol and takes his own life. A 13-year-old girl kidnapped from a wedding, assaulted, returned to her family after 3 days. When her father files a complaint, Uday forces him to deliver his daughter and her 12-year-old sister to a party at the palace. Saher El-Jaff, 13 years old, March of 2003, just before the regime's fall. Kidnapped from a riding club, assaulted, receives the equivalent of $200 as compensation. Amnesty International documents a morality campaign conducted by Fedayeen Saddam, a paramilitary force commanded by Uday. Its members use swords to execute women in front of their homes. More than 200 women are killed in the regime's final 2 years. Najat Mohammed Haidar, a midwife from Baghdad, killed for criticizing corruption in the health service. Official charge? Prostitution. Haidar, a 25-year-old mother of 3. Her head is severed and left in front of her home as a deterrent example. In the spring of 2000, 4 men have their tongues cut out for defamation. Then all are beheaded with swords. In December of 1996, in the Al Mansour district, a 4-man squad opens fire on Uday's golden Porsche. Between 7 and 17 bullets hit the target. Uday survives, but he remains lame for the rest of his life. He requires an 8-inch metal rod in his leg. Revenge is immediate. 7 of the assassin's brothers and his father are imprisoned. Their mother is ordered to collect their bodies. All family homes are razed by bulldozers. On the 18th of October, 1988, at a party honoring Egyptian First Lady Suzanne Mubarak, a drunk Uday kills Kamel Hana Jigeo, his father's personal bodyguard and valet. The reason? Jigeo had introduced Saddam to Samira Shabanda, who became his second wife, which Uday considered an insult to his mother. Saddam briefly imprisons his son, reportedly sentences him to death. After 3 months, he releases him and sends him into exile to Switzerland. There, Uday is expelled for repeated fights, and Qusay, the younger son, quieter, more disciplined, and therefore more dangerous. He commands the Special Security Service. He oversees the weapons of mass destruction program. He controls the Special Guard. Uday kills for pleasure, Qusay for power. Together they represent the 2 faces of Iraqi horror. But this still isn't the complete picture, because the regime's true terror revealed itself only when Saddam went to war, first against a neighbor, then against his own citizens. On the 22nd of September 1980, Iraq attacks Iran. Saddam calls this war Saddam's Qadisiyah, referencing the historic Arab victory over Persians in the 7th century. It's supposed to be a lightning campaign, seizure of Shat al-Arab, the strategic waterway at the Persian Gulf, weakening of Khomeini's revolutionary government, perhaps the capture of oil-rich Khuzestan province. Instead, the conflict transforms into the longest conventional war of the 20th century. 8 years of trenches, chemical weapons, and human waves. Khorramshahr, an Iranian port city near the border. The first battle lasts 34 days, 7,000 dead on each side. Iraq deploys 500 tanks. The city earns the nickname City of Blood. But Iran doesn't surrender. It counterattacks. 2 years later, it recaptures Khorramshahr in 48 hours. 19,000 Iraqi soldiers surrender. A story from those battles survives. 13-year-old Iranian medic Zahed Haftlang saves the life of severely wounded Iraqi soldier Najah Abood. He defends him against 2 Iranian soldiers who want to finish him off. 20 years later, they meet by chance at a trauma center in Vancouver. Such stories, however, are exceptions. The norm is industrial slaughter. Iraq mobilizes up to 1,200,000 soldiers. Losses: between 105,000 and 200,000 soldiers killed, 400,000 wounded, 70,000 in captivity. The Battle for the Al-Far Peninsula in 1986. 100,000 Iranian soldiers in an advanced amphibious operation. Casualties: up to 30,000 Iranians, 8,000 Iraqis. 2 years later, Iraq recaptures Al-Far in 35 hours, with massive use of chemical weapons. Iraqi General Hamdani compared these battles to another battle of the Somme, and chemical weapons become the symbol of this war. Iraq admits to using 1,800 tons of mustard gas, 600 tons of sarin, 140 tons of tabun. More than 350 major gas attacks over 8 years. 20,000 Iranian soldiers die immediately from nerve agents. Over 100,000 total casualties. Testimony from a survivor, a soldier using the pseudonym Churchy. Like many teenagers full of patriotic fervor, I lied about my age, saying I was 18 instead of 17 so I could enlist. One day, at the Persian Gulf, the Iraqis shelled our 200-man platoon with mustard gas and tabun. Many young men had beards, so their masks didn't seal properly. I felt like I was suffocating. Only a few dozen survived. In the summer of 1987 comes a turning point. Sardasht, an Iranian civilian city. The first chemical attack on a city in history. 130 dead, 8,000 wounded. This is a dress rehearsal for Halabja. On the Iranian side, the war takes on a religious character. The Basij militia, Iranian religious volunteers, carries out attacks inspired by stories of the Battle of Karbala. Sometimes, an actor on a white horse plays the imam, galloping along the front lines before an attack. Martyrs sign passports to paradise. Children are used, boys as young as 9, to clear minefields. More than 550,000 students on the front. The Iraqi army panics under the shock of these fanatical attacks. But Saddam has an answer for desertion, a former officer using the pseudonym Youssef. I witnessed the execution of a field marshal and a brigadier on the battlefield. They received orders to attack without time for reconnaissance. They lost the battle. Saddam sent them in again with insufficient intelligence. When they failed again, they were executed. After losing Al-Fur in 1986, approximately 30 officers were publicly hanged for cowardice. Tens of thousands of soldiers desert anyway. In Sulaymaniyah alone, 30,000. In the summer of 1988, the ceasefire comes. Peace without victors. Borders return to their pre-war state. $100 billion spent. 1 million lives lost on both sides. Saddam proclaims, "Great victory." People know better. They don't yet know that the security apparatus, hardened by war, will now be turned against them. Even before the last shots fell silent on the Iranian front, Saddam decides to solve another problem: the Kurds. In northern Iraq, in mountain valleys, live people who are not Arabs. They have their own language, their own culture, and their own desire for freedom. Throughout the Iran war, the Peshmerga, Kurdish guerrillas, conduct operations against Saddam's forces. They control mountainous areas. Now comes the time for revenge. Ali Hassan al-Majid, Saddam's cousin, the man who will earn the nickname Chemical Ali. He receives the task of the final solution to the Kurdish question. The operation has the codename Anfal, a word from the Quran meaning spoils of war. From February to September of 1988, the army conducts 8 stages of a systematic campaign. The methodology is terrifyingly repetitive. First, a given area is declared a forbidden zone. The army has the right to shoot anything that moves. Then, villages are surrounded, bombed, often with gas. Residents are transported by trucks to collection points. There, selection takes place. Men between the ages of 15 and 70 are separated from their families, transported south. At the edges of desert ravines, they're ordered to kneel. Bursts of machine gun fire. Bulldozers bury the bodies. Women, children, and the elderly end up in camps. Inhuman conditions. No water, no food. Hundreds die. Human Rights Watch states plainly, the goal was the physical destruction of the Kurdish population. Approximately 4,000 villages are razed. More than 1,700 mosques demolished. 90% of rural infrastructure destroyed. How many people died? Between 50,000 and 182,000. Approximately 100,000 were abducted. The fate of 8,000 women and children remains unknown. 142 children are still officially missing. And then comes the 16th of March. We return to Halabja, which I mentioned at the beginning of this story. Now you know the context in which this tragedy occurred. 40,000 residents wake up as usual. They don't know this is their last normal day. Iraqi planes drop bombs containing mustard gas, tabun, sarin, VX. Qanim Mohammed is 9 years old. When the attack happened, I survived and they died. We were all together in the basement. Aras Abid is the only survivor from a family of 12. I saw that this was my sister, this was my brother, this was my grandfather. And then I saw my mother. I recognized her by her clothes. Sweeba Mohammed loses 5 children and her sight. For years, officials promised to send me abroad for surgery so I could see the faces of my living children. Hawker Saber is 3 years old during the attack. Today, connected to a respirator for more than 20 hours a day, he still has terrible memories. A young man who lost his parents as an infant. The day I received my diploma from the medical faculty was a sad day for me, because I imagined how proud my parents would have been. Mamosta Fakhreddin watched two of his children die in his arms that day. Today, he teaches at a primary school. He treats every student like his own child. Wafa Abdelkader, spokesman for survivors. Since Saddam's fall, 116 survivors of the attack have died, and with them, their living testimony to the massacre. The world learned about Halabja. Photos circulated in the media, but the world did nothing, because Iraq was the West's ally against Iran. The Anfal campaign was later recognized as genocide. Chemical Ali was executed, but at the time, no one faced consequences. And Saddam was preparing for his next war. 2 years after the Iran war ends, Saddam makes another decision. On the 2nd of August, 1990, the Iraqi army invades Kuwait. It's supposed to be a quick conquest. Annexation of the wealthy emirate, a solution to financial problems. Instead comes Desert Storm. For over a month, coalition aircraft bomb Iraq. Bridges, power plants, waterworks, everything is destroyed. Then the lightning ground campaign. In 100 hours, the Iraqi army is shattered. By late February of 1991, Saddam agrees to a ceasefire. But the story doesn't end there. On the 1st of March, one day after the ceasefire, something unexpected happens in Basra. Soldiers returning from defeat are furious, hungry, humiliated. One of them, driving a T-72 tank, passes through the main square. He sees a giant portrait of Saddam and fires a shell into it. The watching soldiers begin to applaud. Within days, the uprising spreads across the entire Shia south. 14 of 18 provinces slip from control. "The tyrant has fallen!" they shout in the streets. For a brief moment it seems like the end, but the West has no intention of helping. During ceasefire negotiations, General Schwarzkopf makes a fatal error. The Iraqis request permission for helicopters, officially for transport. Schwarzkopf agrees. Asked later, he admits, "I think I got snookered." The Republican Guard moves south. Attack helicopters fire on fleeing civilians. According to sources, they drop napalm and ignite it. The Iraq Survey Group claims the military used the nerve agent sarin against rebels in Karbala. Tanks bear the inscription, "There will be no more Shia after today." Karbala, the holy city for Shia, the site of Imam Hussein's tomb, becomes a battlefield. Hussein Kamel, Saddam's son-in-law, commands the assault. 3 days of intensive shelling. Shells fall on the mosques of Hussein and Abbas. According to accounts, Hussein Kamel stands on a tank before the shrine and shouts, "Your name is Hussein, and so is mine. Let's see who is stronger now." He orders fire to be opened. Soldiers tie women and children to tanks as human shields. Nasir al-Hussein is 12 years old. He is arrested with his mother, uncle, and cousin. When they started pulling us off the bus, some were reciting the Shahada, the Muslim declaration of faith. Mother said, "Repeat the Shahada because we're about to die." I heard children screaming. We held hands. They threw us into a dug grave. There were so many bodies beneath me. They started shooting. One pulled at my clothes and said, "This one isn't dead, shoot him." They shot again, but I wasn't hit. They ordered the bulldozer operator to fill in the grave. I was at the edge. When the bucket came, I crawled out. It was sunset. I reached a place where bamboo was against my face and I could breathe through it. Nasir's mother, uncle and cousin did not survive. Al-Mahawil, near the city of Hilla. After the regime's fall, mass graves were discovered. More than 15,000 bodies in the area. Mayor Iskandar Jawad Witwit. They arrested everyone. People were brought from Hilla, Najaf and Karbala for execution. Executions happened daily. Estimates: between 30 and 100,000 Shia killed. More than 200,000 killed or disappeared. 2 million displaced. In Najaf, the 95-year-old Grand Ayatollah al-Khoi, the supreme Shia cleric, was arrested with 105 members of his family. He was forced to appear with Saddam before cameras. He remained under house arrest for the rest of his life. The number of clerics in Najaf: 8,000 20 years earlier, 800 before the uprising. After the uprising, virtually all had vanished. Libraries with 1,000-year-old manuscripts destroyed, cemeteries demolished, a highway built over graves. To eliminate the base for rebels, the regime carried out a project to drain the marshes in the south. Unique ecosystems that had existed for thousands of years were destroyed. The traditional way of life of the marsh Arabs annihilated. In 2011, the US ambassador officially apologized for America's inaction, 20 years too late. And for Iraqis, another decade of nightmare was coming. After the Kuwait War, the UN maintained sanctions. The official goal? Force Saddam to destroy weapons of mass destruction. The unofficial result? The slow extermination of a nation. Iraq is cut off from 97% of its income and 90% of its imports. And Iraq imported 70% of its food. In the first 7 months, the country managed to import only 10,000 tons of grain, less than daily requirements. Shops empty. Inflation rages. At its worst, $1 costs 3,000 dinars. Remember that a decade earlier, 1 dinar was worth more than $3. Professor Wahid Nadmi, educated in Britain, earns the equivalent of $11 a month. I can't afford to eat fish. My children can't eat apples. To survive, he sells family heirlooms. A ceremonial dagger, a Persian rug, gold jewelry. Teachers earn below $10 a month, and average food expenditure for a family is 7 times a civil servant's salary. The list of items blocked by the Sanctions Committee is absurd. Incubators for premature babies, banned. They could be used for biological weapons. Chlorine for water treatment, banned. Dual-use substance. Pencils, banned. Graphite could serve the military. Atropine, banned. It's an antidote for nerve agents. White cloth, banned. Could be used to sew uniforms. Hatching eggs for chickens, banned. Viruses can be grown in them. Jeremy Scahill, American journalist. Every pediatric hospital resembled a death cell for infants. Highly trained doctors had the knowledge to save these children, but sanctions blocked access to basic supplies. Doctors were forced to reuse syringes and watch children die from treatable diseases. Iraqi hospitals reeked of gasoline because doctors used it instead of disinfectants. Al-Karama Hospital in Baghdad, 400 beds. According to the director, nothing works except the doctors. Rusty beds without wheels, dirty mattresses with holes, no soap, no syringes, no gauze. Only 2 of 6 operating rooms function. Child mortality under age 5 doubles. Estimates speak of hundreds of thousands of additional deaths. Illiteracy among youth rises from 20 to 55%. Secondary school enrollment drops from 57 to 20%. Everything Iraq built in the 1970s falls apart. Organ trafficking appears. Desperate people sell kidneys for a few $100s. And Saddam? Saddam builds palaces. The Oil for Food program launches in 1996. It allows selling oil and buying food under UN supervision. Theoretically, it helps. In practice, it's riddled with corruption. Nearly half of the 4,500 participating companies paid bribes. Total value, nearly $2 billion. Smuggling outside the program, nearly $11 billion. Benon Sevan, the program's director, receives vouchers for more than 10 million barrels of oil. He flees to Cyprus. He is never extradited. Ordinary Iraqis receive monthly rations: 9 kilograms of flour, 3 kilograms of rice, 2 of sugar, 1 liter of oil, 200 grams of tea, 1 kilogram of powdered milk. 60% of the population is completely dependent on these rations. According to reports, much of the food was unfit for human consumption. The Transnational Institute titled its report, "How to Kill an Entire Country." And Saddam? He survived. His palaces stood. His statues dominated the streets. His face was on every watch. Until the spring of 2003. On the 20th of March 2003, the invasion begins. Coalition forces enter Iraq. For 3 weeks, a lightning campaign unfolds. The Iraqi army, weakened by a decade of sanctions, collapses. On the 9th of April, American tanks roll into Firdos Square in Baghdad. The 12-meter statue of Saddam, erected a year earlier for his birthday, falls. The world watches on television. For many Iraqis, It's a moment of euphoria. Shia and Kurds celebrate. Finally, the end. But the euphoria doesn't last long. The coalition dissolves the army, hundreds of thousands of soldiers without jobs. The Ba'ath Party is banned. Anyone with a membership card, and most had one because they had to, loses their position. Teachers, doctors, engineers. There is no police, no army, no administration. Looting begins. The Baghdad Museum is plundered, ministries burn. Under Saddam, we feared him. Now we fear everything. And then comes civil war. Sunnis, followers of mainstream Islam, against Shia, who venerate the Prophet's descendants. Al-Qaeda, militias, death squads. At its peak, an average of 56 people die daily. An exodus of specialists. Before the invasion, 34,000 doctors. By the end of the decade, more than 18,000 had emigrated. 2,000 had been killed. 70% of specialists left the country. More than 2,000 professors leave in a single year. 459 academics killed. The ministry closes 152 departments due to lack of staff. In Syria, more than 1/3 of Iraqi refugees hold university degrees. The Syrian government opens a hospital staffed entirely by Iraqi émigré doctors. Khatam Sharif al-Jabouri, the same man who helped topple the statue, says 15 years later, "Now I truly regret striking that monument." Khaith Abdul Ahad, an Iraqi journalist, "After the American invasion, it became unthinkable. People started saying, 'Oh, Saddam wasn't that bad.'" How do Iraqis remember those times today? It depends on whom you ask. Mustafa Kubaisi, a shopkeeper from Baghdad. "Our country became a mess. The only victims are us, innocent people, who began to believe that life under a dictatorial regime was better than now." General Najim al-Jabouri. "Most people before, Sunnis and Shia, didn't like the regime. But many, comparing the situation then and now, think their lives were maybe better." Pollster Munkith Duggar notes, however, "Most of those who say it was better are under 30. They weren't alive or weren't aware of the situation. Their answers reflect dissatisfaction with the current situation, not a real opinion about the previous regime." Young people ask, what did Saddam actually do to us? Those who survived Anfal have an answer. Those who lost loved ones in 1991 have an answer. Those whose families vanished after a nighttime knock have an answer. An elderly Iraqi woman tells a reporter, "The sins of the current regime make the previous one look innocent." The divide runs along religious and ethnic lines. Sunnis often remember with nostalgia. They dominated the army, security services, and administration. After 2003, they lost their positions. Shia remember differently. Massacres, disappearances, decades of discrimination. Kurds have no doubt. "We were victims of genocide. Never again." And Christians? Cardinal Tauran of the Vatican admitted, paradoxically, they were more protected under the dictatorship. Before 2003, up to 1.5 million Christians. Today, perhaps 400,000 remain. This is the paradox that Iraqis must confront. Two truths about the same country. Truth 1. An era of development, education, women's advancement, safety on the streets. Truth 2. An era of mass graves, torture, disappearances, fear of one's own child. Both are true. Both coexisted. One of the women studied by anthropologist Najeh al-Ali put it this way. A Shia middle-class family in Baghdad had more in common with their Sunni and Kurdish neighbors than with impoverished Shia from the outskirts. Mixed marriages were common. Baghdad families were multi-religious and multi-ethnic. And then, everything fell apart. In Halabja, 35 years after the attack, survivors continue to die. The effects of gas exposure never relent. Since Saddam's fall, 116 survivors of the attack have died, and with them, their living testimony. In Baghdad, palace ruins still stand. Some have been converted into hotels, others into museums. In Karbala and Najaf, Shia freely observe Ashura, the most important Shia mourning holiday, commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. millions of pilgrims. Under Saddam, it was forbidden. In Kurdistan, the Peshmerga guard their autonomy. We will never submit again. In the diaspora, from Amman to Dearborn, Iraqis try to piece their memories together. An anonymous Baghdad resident. Those who leave Iraq are searching for happiness, but even if they find it, it's artificial. It cannot heal the wounds of being separated from family, nation, memory. A retired professor from Basra. How painful it is to remember my school years, not only because I miss my youth, but because I miss the sense of hope that good education provided. Sinan Antoun, an Iraqi poet. I've already crossed the halfway point of my life. I've lived more years outside Baghdad than inside. But paradoxically, I feel closer now. The city inhabits me. Its river flows through my soul. This is the true lesson from Saddam's Iraq. Stability built on fear is only an illusion. Sooner or later, it cracks, leaving ruins. And people who cannot agree even on what they experienced. A state that nearly eliminated illiteracy, and with bureaucratic precision carried out genocide. A country of the first female judge in the Arab world, and sword executions of women on the streets. A country with a UNESCO Education Award, and a Quran written in the dictator's blood. Under Saddam, there was bread and there was security, say some. There wasn't a day without fear, others respond. And both sides are right. Every family, Sunni, Shia, Kurdish, Christian, has its own version of this history, and each of them is true. And so ends our journey today. A journey through a country that was simultaneously everything and nothing. Paradise and hell, hope and nightmare. If you've made it here with me, thank you. I know this wasn't an easy story. And if this story moved you, if you learned something, if you want more stories like this, you know what to do. Subscribe, thumbs up, and that little bell. It really helps reach more people who are looking for something deeper than just entertainment. In the description, you'll find the sources I used. Because with me, nothing is made up. Every fact can be verified. And now? Now go drink some tea, or coffee, or something stronger, because after a story like this, you might need it. Until next time.